Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to talk about adjusting the groove and the feel of the music when we're quantizing our audio, and mostly you use this with MIDI. So off we go. Okay, so I'm going to open up, I've got this piano track here that is not quantized at all, and I'm going to open up the Event Operations Quantize window. All right. And we're going to look at a couple of these settings. Now we've already talked about note on and note off and preserve note duration, right? So note on means it's going to quantize the front of each of these MIDI events. Note off means it would quantize the end. Preserve note duration will turn off if you tell it to quantize both, because it can't preserve the note duration if it's adjusting both ends of each note. And then preserve note duration keeps the original length of the notes and just moves which end that you want it to. So the most common are note on and preserve note duration for those. Then we have some more things that we can do. So we have our quantize grid that lets you choose how you want to push your notes onto the grid, right? So do I want my notes to go to the nearest 16th of the grid, or do I want triplets of the grid? So do I want dotted notes? And then you even have some of these grooves where you can kind of see if it can add some feel if you want into your quantization too. Another one you can choose is randomize. That will give a little bit of a like humanized feel by after doing the quantization, it will move things forward and backward just a little bit so that it feels a little bit more like a human. So let's try doing like 50%, just really drastic on this part here. And you'll notice these guys should get quantized to the right to the grid line, but let's see what happens. And there we go. The first one, and it's really drastic. You don't usually need this much, 50%, but this one is way after the beat. This one's just before, this one's just before, this one's just after. It's going to randomly move them forward or back just a little bit to give it a more human feel. So typically you don't need more than, say, 10%. So I'm going to undo and try 10% instead. Let's compare with it off first. So off, it's right to the grid every note, which can sound robotic if you're not careful. And then let's try with a 10% random. And now they're just slightly off, and it may sound a little bit more human that way. Cool, so that's kind of a nice thing. I'm going to undo again, come back here, undo the original quantization too. So I'm turning off randomize, and then we've got a few more options here too. So swing. All right, so let's demonstrate this swing option with this drum track. So here's the regular drum track, and you'll notice it's just a little bit behind the beat deliberately, which is kind of nice. And we're just going to get it to swing a little bit by putting it at like a 90% swing and hit apply. And I'm going to undo it and do even more. Let's try like 70. And that's definitely a harder swing. So maybe you can feel the difference. Very straight. And then Pro Tools can handle giving it a little bit of a swing if you need that feel. Kind of cool that it can do that so well. Then include within will allow it to only move the notes that are really close by over to the grid. So within 16% of my grid, it will push them right onto the grid. But if it's past that, so farther away than say this note or this note that are pretty far from the grid, it will leave those alone. So notice only the ones that were close, I'll do it again. These are going to move because they're close to the grid already, but notes that are far from the grid won't get touched. So that's include within. Then exclude within, let's try the same percentage or so, about 17%, and see what we get. So that does, it leaves the notes that are close to the grid already, right? So the ones that are already pretty good, it only pulls stuff that's way off the grid. So stuff that's really late or really early will get adjusted. So these two are later than some of the others. So if I apply, those two get pushed, but everybody who is already close by stayed put. So that's exclude within. And then strength, how much do I really want to push the notes around? We can adjust that too. So maybe 50%. And they just move a little bit, but they don't get all the way there, right? So how hard do I want to push them? How much do I want to push them towards the grid, right? So if the harder that we do it, the more they're going to get forced closer to the grid. If you do full strength, they're all going to end up right on the grid, which may sound robotic again. So you can again humanize this a little bit by doing a little less, right? So if I do say 50%, it's just going to tighten it up a little bit without actually forcing it into robot land. Cool. And one other I missed earlier, offset grid by. So you can do a little bit of your own pushing or pulling on these. Notice almost every one of these hits is a little bit late compared to the grid. Almost every drum hit is just slightly late. That's deliberate because it gives kind of a laid back feel. But maybe we want it to instead be way up on the beat, just ahead of the beat. So it has this kind of pushed feeling instead. So here's the way it is right now. All right, so let's hear it pushed a little bit. So I go to Event Operations, and then Quantize, or Option 0 on a PC. That's what? Option or Alt 0. Let's get this guy ahead of the beat a little bit. So we're going to offset our quantize by a little bit, and so everything is going to end up a little bit ahead of the beat. And I think if we go -20, what will that do? That gets us just ahead. There we go. So positive will go right, negative will go left of the grid, and now it should sound like the drums are kind of pushing the energy. So they're all just slightly ahead of the grid, and it kind of gives this extra tension, right? So let me do it again, and let's go the other. So what it was before was laid back. You can feel it feels very kind of like comfortable, right? And then I'll do that same quantize again up ahead of the beat a little bit. It's not off time, it's just ahead of the beat slightly. And it just feels a little more tense. Not the greatest for this particular tune, but there's plenty of time when you want to add that little bit of extra tension to give a different feel, right? To give that more energetic feel, or maybe you only do it at a portion of the track so that it suddenly starts to feel like something's coming, right? So there's some really great musical effects you can do with these. So that's all about using our event operations to adjust our feel. All right, see you the next one.